Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi. Minister, the question of compliance is obviously a big issue. You've already acknowledged that your systems is facing a challenge. If that system in terms of UIF is under pressure, surely the system to get inspectors out to places of business is also under pressure. Are you able to effectively enforce the regulations in terms of the temporary employee-employer assistance fund and also UIF and other measures to protect workers?
Well, our inspectors are doing the best they can under these circumstances. There are serious areas of violations where our inspectors have to go there and give warning notices to the companies. It's happening around Gauteng, in the Western Cape, and in particular in around KZN, in Durban in particular, the big metros. And our inspectors continue to visit, although they are not enough. In some instances, it's not just warning, they've closed, and they've instructed those, to close, those companies to close if there are serious violations, because the issue of the protection of the workers is very, very essential, and nobody should expose those workers. So the issue of the health and the welfare of the workers must be a priority over the economic activity.
Now,
and
we've seen,
that's what we are appealing to the employers.
Yeah, let me just come in here. We've seen a big Pick n Pay in Mitchell's Plain, for example, being closed because they were violating the regulations. There was no practicing of physical and social distance. There was no sanitizer. People weren't respecting, the rules of the lockdown. That place has been closed. We've also seen all the public sector unions, from police to health, complain that essential workers do not have the kit and the gear to perform their jobs. They don't have PPE. Are you in a position to tell us which government departments your inspectors have actually shut down or have penalized as a consequence of them not providing protective gear for essential workers?
The issue of protecting the workers by the employers, regardless of who the employer is, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, it's non-negotiable. That is why last week when Nehau raised the issues, we were able to interact with the Department of Health, and there were certain agreements which were reached there, and on how to deal with the issues in the various sites or in the various clinics and the hospitals. And we left it to the Department of Health. And we know that there were discussions also at the corrections and even with the police on what has to be done. But at this stage, when we had discussions with them, it didn't warrant that they should just close. We must accept this fact, that part of the problem, the demand of these PPPs has been very, very huge. As a result, there were problems either in the manufacturing, in the production, and even in the distribution. The supply was not able to stand the demand. However, we've been able to say the employers have to comply. And we were told that these have been ordered from this particular place. They will be enough now. We are going to be able to assess this particular week and get the reports as to what has happened since we met with them last week, in particular the Department of Health.
Let's go to the private sector and particularly the retail sector. Now, obviously, shopping centres, shops that sell food and workers who pack shelves have increasingly become sick. We've seen several Dis-Chems, several food retailers having to close in busy suburbs as a consequence of people getting infected. What is the compliance rate in the retail sector, particularly in places like shopping centres and places where people buy food? Because obviously you have to satisfy the public that it's safe to go out and buy those essential foods, and you have to satisfy the workers that risk their lives to keep those shelves stacked.
Some of the big supermarkets have been complying. and some have not. That's why, for instance, you quoted
Can you name and shame the minister? Can you name and shame who is complying and who's not complying?
Not at this stage. We have given those people what we call warnings, and we want cooperation from them. It's only when we take it to the next step that we are going to be either charging people or prohibiting to do business at all. I don't think at this stage we're going to do that, but when we go back and we find that they have not implemented what we had requested them to do, it's only then that we're going to be able to name and shame.
Now, we've got 3 hospitals, private hospitals at that, that have been forced to close. The Minister of Health last night again raising the concern, about St. Augustine, for example. Have your inspectors been to those hospitals to establish factually what went wrong there? Because it's very clear that both patients and health workers were exposed at these hospitals. And these are, of course, private institutions.
Our view on this one is that we are appealing to all the employers that it can be profits before the health of the workers. In fact, it's embarrassing if this thing has happened in a hospital where they are supposed to take the very clear measures, hygienic measures. It's really embarrassing. Our inspectors have been to those, they are compiling the reports, and I guess there might be investigations at other levels of government to see what actually happened. But also we are saying employers should not hide once they discover that something has happened. We have encouraged employers to do the testing using their own resources. And we're saying they must not hide this, because it will be very helpful that they come forward with this particular information and we're able to take the necessary measures. For instance, under the UIF, the compensation fund, there is something which is there for the workers who happen to get sick, who can be able to get a particular benefit. And even if they have to go to the hospital, it's there, it's catered for. So the employers just need to be honest.
Now, one of the things, of course, that is completely new is that the market economy, as we know it, Minister, has changed, which obviously impacts the world of work. The whole notion of how people work, when they work, what is an essential service has changed. Just from a policy perspective, Minister, what can we expect going forward? Because we all know, even though the lockdown might be lifted in stages, the nature of this disease is forcing everything to change. What policy changes are afoot to regulate the labour market to comply with a globe that now exists in the reality of COVID-19?
First, I think we all accept that this health crisis has now gone beyond being a health crisis. It's an economic crisis. There might have to be a fundamental redesign of our economy. But at this stage, discussions are continuing. We also, as a department, we're re-looking at the employment policy for the country. And at this stage, we won't be able to say this is what exactly is going to happen. We are hard in the discussions, looking into the different options. Next week, we're having discussions with the ILO as ministers of labor to say what are the different countries, how are they responding, what are likely to be the future policies which might need to be amended. So it's very clear that it won't be the way we've been doing things. There must be that fundamental change. But at this stage, as and when the government announces the new economic stimuli and announces how we're going to do things, maybe we'll be able to come up with those fundamental changes.
Now, it's interesting that you speak about the International Labour Organization. It segues into what I was going to talk about. We've seen a workers' strike action in some industries, both in Italy and in America, where, for example, essential services have continued, but people feel that they haven't been given PPE, they haven't been given proper wages, and that their rights are violated. Now, obviously, even things like strikes, like protest action, is completely changed because people cannot gather to express their solidarity or even their industrial action. So are you looking at possible changes to our labour regime in South Africa, and how will it affect things like the right to strike, especially essential workers, because this has also been an area that's never really been nailed down properly in terms of bargaining councils across essential services in the country?
At this stage, Karima, the Labour Relations Act remains. It has not been changed. It remains supreme. Even those who want to also retrench the workers, who have said they must go according to Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act. So at this stage, it has not changed. We'll just have to do a study, a very deep study as to if there is a need for some changes. Then we can be able to do that. But at this stage, we're not changing anything until such time that we have done a very detailed study.
Now, you've spoken about the fact that there will be no changes. It segues into my question. In terms of public sector workers, government before the lockdown, and in fact the finance minister had indicated that the public sector wage bill needs to be cut, and some public sector workers have expressed their unhappiness that when they were meant to receive part of that 3-year cyclical increases, they haven't received it. How is the Department of Labour taking the behaviour of government as an employer into account, given the fact that they ought to honour the agreement? They can't willy-nilly not honour that agreement.
Karima, the leading department here is the Department of Public Service and Administration, but of course we are the supporting department. What we will have to do, if there is a dispute, and it's normal that disputes are going to be there, we must just follow the dispute resolving mechanisms which are there in the Labour Relations Act, even if it's a dispute with government. But with all the pressures, on the fiscus and everything, this means that everyone has to sacrifice. And who is going to sacrifice? How? That's what we have to debate. We must not treat this period as a normal period. It means from all of us, from the employers, from the employees, from companies and so on, there must be sacrifices. As to what those sacrifices should be the product of the engagement. I believe that at the Labour Relations Council, there's still an engagement between the employer, which is represented by the DPSA, and the unions.
Now, just a final question. The last thing that you obviously want is public sector workers on strike as a consequence of the state not honouring that wage agreement, the 3-year wage agreement. How are you going to make sure that the parties stay in the negotiations forums and that we don't, face the possibility of a showdown with public sector workers, particularly essential services?
The dispute on the non-implementation of the agreement, it's an issue which workers cannot go on strike on. It's a matter which have to be taken for a dispute resolving mechanism, either mediation or arbitration, and then it can end up in the Labour Court. But that's not for a strike. It's there in the Labour Relations Act. So they can't go on strike on that.
All right, Minister of Labour and Employment.
What it's there is to encourage them and use the CCMA to deal with the dispute. And we know that after this, there's going to be enough on the plate of the CCMA with disputes left and right, but they are ready for that.
All right, that's where we will leave it. Of course, that case is something, or rather that situation is something that we must keep an eye on. Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi. After the break, more and more people are petitioning President Ramaphosa to introduce a basic income grant that will ameliorate hardships during COVID-19. On the other side of this, stay with us.